Hey there, Mr. Redder here. Welcome back to another episode of r/Entitled Parent Stories. Our first story we'll be reading today. Karen Squatter tried to steal my brother's house. After that, am I the jerk for my no plants or animals in the house policy? And after that, am I the jerk for giving my son's dog to his ex-wife? Now for every thumbs up this video gets, one Karen does not get to steal anyone's house. Keep the house. Your retirement pension is what I'm after. So please smash that like button. And subscribe and turn on notifications for new stories from Reddit every single day. Karen Squatter tried to steal my brother's house. Several years ago, my brother Dan moved from California to Washington State, and he built a 3-bedroom house on one of 2 parcels of land he had bought when he was 18 years old. He lived in a nice community with a small lake, and they had an HOA. During the 2008 economic crash, he ran into financial trouble, so we helped him. To repay us for the help, in March of 2016, he came down to California for an extended period to work on our house, which was neglected because of helping him. He was very proficient at renovating houses and he did fantastic work. In November, my brother's friend, Jake, called him and asked if a friend of his, Tuna, could stay in one of the rooms for $400 per month. Dan had worked for many years with Jake doing construction for a house flipper, so he trusted Jake's judgment, needed the money, and thought it might be good to have someone trustworthy there to watch his house. Dan drove back up to Washington, cleaned out a room, put a lock on his bedroom door, locked the door, and put some of his things in a storage area up out of the way in the garage. Tuna seemed nice and gave Dan $400 for the first month. There was never a written rental agreement. It was just verbal and meant to be temporary because Dan was going to return in 6 months. Tuna never sent another payment. We would call and ask her, and she always said it had been sent, but nothing ever arrived. So what was going on at his house? We pieced together that something wrong was going on after Dan's neighbor called and after questioning Jake. The neighbor complained that the house had turned into chaos, full of people and cars coming and going all hours of the night. After the beginning of June 2017, Dan drove back to Washington and handed Tuna a 3-day eviction notice. She left, stating that she had somewhere else to live and would get her stuff later. He was allowing her to retrieve her stuff at a later date. He just wanted her out. He started working on repairs and cleaning up the house. I mailed Dan a care package with some clothes, a California-themed shopping bag, and gift cards for gas and food. 5 days later, Tuna showed up with 2 men who beat up Dan. They wanted to take the house back by force. Dan went to the neighbor and they called the police. The police came, and instead of arresting the men and Tuna, they took Dan to jail for missing a child support court date, which then put a warrant on him. Before coming to California, he thought everything regarding child support back payments for his independent, successful 23-year-old adult kid had been completely taken care of. He had no idea about a court date since they notified by mail, and Tuna had never forwarded his mail, which was one of the things she promised to do. The child support scam on Dan is another issue I will have to submit later. So the police essentially handed the house over to Tuna. She and her cronies went in, changed the locks, and placed a long metal bar across the inside of the garage door so that it could not be opened from the outside. They stole the package I sent to Dan and they spent the gift cards. Meanwhile, my family and I were on vacation in Hawaii, and I received a phone call from Dan in jail. I spent a whole day of my vacation in the hotel room trying to figure out how to get him out of jail. Bail bonds could not be used for child support cases. Finally, they let him out when I paid a child support payment of $350. He had been in jail for 3 days, and the squatters had dug themselves in. So when he returned to his house, he had to call the police to arrest them for trespassing. After all, Tuna had been evicted, left, and no longer had permission to be there. They were squatters by all accounts, but the state defers to people who just claim they are renting, therefore requiring a landlord to go through the court system to remove the so-called tenants, who are actually just squatters. The police came and did him over once again. Tuna claimed she was renting the entire house, and the police believed her instead of Dan. She told the policeman that she would leave in 10 days, and the policeman told Dan that he would have his house back in 10 days because Tuna said she would leave by then. Are you kidding me? Dan was instructed to leave the premises or be arrested. It was his house. She was trespassing. He got into his minivan and he drove away, with nowhere to stay but in his van. Of course, Tuna did not leave after 10 days. Dan went back after 10 days and called the police again. Once again, the police told him to leave or be arrested. We didn't know what to do next. One of the HOA board members, who had some experience in managing real estate properties, attempted to help us. She said that he needed a 20-day eviction notice, then Tuna would be out, and this had always worked for her when she had to evict tenants. Okay, so the 20-day notice was posted and we waited. Tuna did not leave. Dan went over to his house and started cleaning up trash thrown all over the yard, waiting for her to leave. Tuna called the police, stating that she was a renter and he was disturbing her. Once again, Dan was asked to leave or be arrested. This time, Dan put his phone on speaker and I heard the whole interaction between him and the police. Yes, he had to leave or be arrested. Dan could not even get his construction tools out of the garage and could not work without his tools. And with being homeless, how do you even work? What was going to happen to all of his possessions, his sentimental things? His room had been broken into long before, his things removed, and people had used the room. It was near the end of summer. We were paying his mortgage payments, and it was getting so hard on everyone. Then something nice happened. A kind friend, Adam, asked him to stay at his house, which Dan did. During this time, Dan worked for Adam with loan tools and also went to some landlord and tenant educational meetings. The people at the meetings were helpful and instructed Dan on how to proceed by taking the matter to the court. The police would not go further without a court order to physically evict Tuna. It would be difficult to afford the case to hire a lawyer, but eventually we did end up getting a lawyer. Dan posted a court appearance on the door of his house, since Tuna never answered the door, and that is what you do legally in this case. Every time he posted a court appearance, he had to legally give her 1 week notice, which he did. He showed up at court and Tuna failed to show up, so he won by default, right? Wrong. The judge said that Tuna was not given proper notice because the notice was posted by Dan instead of an anonymous person. Dan walked out of the courtroom. The lawyers from the landlord and tenant meetings were there and they couldn't believe it. Unfortunately, Adam had to move out of his house he was renting, so Dan had to go back to living in his van. It was autumn in the Pacific Northwest and getting cold. The police had started harassing him if he slept in his van. We rented motel rooms for Dan. One night at a motel, Dan heard a knock on the door in the middle of the night. He thought it was the motel staff and opened the door. 2 men burst into the room and proceeded to beat him up and they robbed him. They broke his finger and they gave him a concussion. Dan ran to his van, drove it to a parking lot, and he slept. He refused to go back to the motel. Things were starting to go downhill in a very bad way. I found a lawyer from a nonprofit who worked for free to help. He actually used that 3-day eviction notice that Dan had given Tuna back in June as a basis for the case. I had found it online. The wording was appropriate and it had been served properly. The lawyer had to jump through endless hoops in court appearances. The same judge presided over every case that had to do with evictions, and she always favored the tenants, including entitled ones. This took forever, like 3 more months, and Dan became haggard, homeless, sick, depressed, and at times he had gone missing. Once I called every hospital, jail, homeless shelter, and even the food bank looking for him. His van was impounded 4 times. He was hospitalized 4 times. He was endlessly hunted down and harassed by the police. 3 times I found him because I was listed as his emergency contact on his state insurance, and he showed up at the hospitals. While all of this was happening to Dan, my husband was in a serious motorcycle accident, and I had to take care of my husband, changing his dressings, etc. Okay, I'm crying right now. This was so hard to endure, remember, and difficult to write about. I couldn't leave and fly up to Washington to help my brother, but I was doing everything down here to get his house back with the lawyer. I got him motel rooms at other motels when I could. I paid 4 times to get his van out of impound. I sent him cell phones and care packages, delivered at UPS stores. One time, Dan was lost and didn't have his van or phone. He ended up at a hospital who contacted me. He told me that he had felt really sick and had gone to the hospital earlier, who released him after examining him, even after he pleaded with them to let him stay because he felt horribly sick. He ended up collapsing on the sidewalk by the Salvation Army shelter, who wouldn't even let him in, and another homeless person called 911. So he was back at the hospital with a very serious condition affecting his heart. I told the hospital to please call me at release time so I could arrange a motel for Dan. They didn't. He was then found in a park in frigid weather, dressed in a pair of scrubs, a t-shirt, a hoodie, and 1 shoe. A city policeman called me and took him to a motel, where he stayed a while. I sent a care package there. Dan told me that one time when he was being harassed by the police for cooking food in a park, he mouthed off and told them that they were jerks, and it was their fault that he was homeless because they gave his house to a squatter. A fire truck arrived, so he was not arrested with the fireman there, but I don't think the police liked him much for saying that. In October, Dan was arrested for drunk driving while he was sleeping in a Walmart parking lot. I had to bail him out of jail over that. Every time he didn't get to court hearings, they would post warrants for his arrest. One time he was in jail and they refused to give him his medication, so I had to bail him out because he felt so awful. In mid-November, the police arrested Dan again for not showing up to court for that so-called drunk driving incident. He begged me to bail him out. Even though the bail bondsman paid the bail in the late afternoon, the jail released him in the middle of the night, again with no vehicle, impounded, a dead cell phone, no charger, it's in the van, no money, etc. I found out later that this jail only releases people at night so they can get credit and are paid by the state for the whole day. That night he was released, it was our deceased mother's birthday. Dan was then found unconscious in a ditch by a seawall in a Starbucks parking lot. He had a broken femur, a broken hip, cracked spine, and a head concussion, and his finger was still broken from the motel incident. The doctors evaluated that he had been hit in the back of his head with something. We do not know who did it. The last thing he remembers was a police car driving by. He was airlifted to a major hospital in Seattle, about 50 miles from where he was. I took a flight up to Seattle as soon as I could and I visited him. The doctor showed me the x-rays and he had countless rods and pins put into his body to put him back together. By this time, we were getting closer to having his house back. I went by the house with Adam's brother-in-law, Paul, who was packing heat. We pounded on the door and I demanded that the squatters hand over my deceased mother's rocking chair. The stupid friend, Jake, was there and he handed it to me through the door. It was a big heirloom mission-style chair and they had burned into the chair in 4-inch letters the word wasted. The court order finally became available, but then we had to schedule the eviction according to when the police had time to do it, which was another 2 weeks. It was scheduled for the beginning of December. I went back home to California briefly and returned the night of the eviction. Dan was in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. When he was released, I arranged a nice long-term stay-type hotel back near home for him to live at until the police evicted the squatters. Paul helped us a lot. He was with the police at the eviction, changed all the locks, and secured the house. He picked up Dan at the hotel, and Dan got to witness the eviction of that entitled jerk. She was the only one left in the house. A notice had been posted on the door to warn everyone to leave, but as usual, she didn't think there would be any reason she would have to leave. It took her completely by surprise. The police pounded on the door and demanded she leave immediately. She asked if she could get this and get that, but no, she couldn't. She grabbed her little dog, purse, and left with nothing else. The police put a notice on the door after Paul secured everything. Dan was driven back to the hotel, and then I arrived. I wish I could have seen the eviction, but I couldn't get a flight early enough. The neighbors said that a bunch of people came to the house that night pounding on the door trying to get in, but they couldn't. They almost called the police, but the people left. We went over there every day for about a week to clean up. Dan was confined to a wheelchair, and he was on heavy meds, so it was hard. He couldn't help too much, but he did his best. The house was a disaster. There were literally 5 tons of garbage in the yard around the house. The trash disposal service was not activated during this time, so they just piled it up around the house. On one side of the house was a huge pillar of trash made out of wire fencing. It was about 8 by 8 feet and at least 12 feet high. The front yard was awful, with several piles of trash about 4 feet high. Tuna left every single thing in the kitchen, in the cupboards, and rotting food in the pans. The carpets were soaked in dog pee. There were clothes and junk everywhere. There were loads of crushed glass embedded into the gravel driveway, like she wanted us to get flat tires. Over the doorway from the house into the garage was a dangerous booby trap, which literally could have hurt someone. It was made out of large, heavy metal clamps with a glass jewelry case teetering on top of these clamps. It could have fallen on the top of someone's head if not discovered, and someone jarred it a little. The water had been shut off for months by the HOA because they control the well and they own the water system. As soon as you don't pay the HOA fees, water is shut off. All the toilets were clogged up. The sewage system was impossible to unclog, and later, Dan discovered that they had thrown dirt and plastic containers down the pipes. They had to go under the house and disassemble the pipes to get everything out. Hanging up on the wall in plain sight in the master bedroom was the California shopping bag I had mailed to Dan and that package that Tuna had stolen. She hung it there to taunt me. I'm not super religious, but I felt the worst kind of evil there and had to pray and rebuke the evil spirits from that house. I stayed for weeks there, cleaning up, and hired some people to do some yard clean out to get the front yard clean. Later, Dan and Adam dealt with a pillar of trash at the side of the house. Every construction tool that belonged to Dan was stolen. He couldn't work much from a wheelchair, but he needed the tools to repair his own house. Dan persisted though. He finally got to the point where he could walk. Now he can't walk for long periods, he gets tired easily, but he can do things slowly. He has some nice roommates that drive him places and take care of him at times. Many of his tools have been replaced. He sanded off the word "wasted" on Mom's rocking chair. We have sunk a lot of money into helping him, but what else is one supposed to do? It was a life or death situation. That was his house he had built so many years ago. This was the most wicked thing I've ever encountered. It was coming from all directions. We heard that the creepy squatter passed a year ago. No one wanted to take her in, and she went from person to person, staying wherever she could. If she would have been decent and kind, she probably could have been a roommate and had a place. But she thought that she could just take someone else's house. Am I the jerk for my no plants or animals in the house policy? My kids really wanted pets, and so did my partner. They got a mixed breed puppy from the pound and 2 kittens. As these animals grew, none of the humans in my house did anything to care for them besides playing with them and cuddling. I got up at 5:30 a.m. to walk the dog before work. I cleaned the kitty litter boxes out. I took them to the vet. I had to buy and serve all of their food and cleaned up their eating areas afterward. People would just forget otherwise. Naturally, I also had to clean up after them when I'd arrive home, and inevitably, no one had bothered and there were messes all over the floor. If I made my partner or kids do it, they'd do a horrible job, to the point where they might as well have not even bothered. Same way with the plants. Partner wanted houseplants and to start indoor herb and vegetable gardens. Had fun with it for the first week, then totally ignored it. Dead leaves, spilt soil, bugs, etc. now proliferate in the garden area. If I don't water and groom the plants, it doesn't get done. I'm busy, and these are not my chosen hobbies. I like animals well enough, but they're a lot of work, and when they aren't attended to, destroy the house. I grew up with a family that hoarded pets, and our house was always nasty and smelly and embarrassing. I swore when I had my own place it would be different. The cats pee and spray everywhere, and I can't get to the litter box in time, and the dog chews up stuff and leaves big messes on the floor if I don't walk it. I'm the only one who will walk him when it gets cold. We have a fenced-in backyard. I bought a doghouse and announced he'll live outside from now on, till they can prove that they can take care of him better. Same with the cats. They're now outdoor kitties till my humans can show me they're ready for indoor ones. Of course, if the weather is extreme, I'll let them in. Plants are all going out. I'm done. Am I the jerk? New remarks. Hi, I've read all the responses, and I'm now going to stop with comments because I get the overall consensus. I'm going to copy and paste here what I put in another comment. I have no idea how to rehome these adult pets besides Facebook or Craigslist, and you don't really know who's going to take them. You don't know anything about the people showing up. They could be going from a bad situation here to even worse. Rehoming adult pets is not as easy as you're all making it out to be. I don't have abundant resources of time or energy to address this. It's causing problems, and this is the best solution I can come up with for now to calm everybody down. I've tried for over a year to do the best I possibly could for these pets, but I just can't anymore. I don't know how to force other people to do the right thing and be more responsible. Pets aren't just for snuggles and cuddles. They require a lot more attention and devotion. And yes, I've tried punishing my kids and withholding privileges for lack of care. I told my partner they weren't ready for pets. He brought them home anyway. If finding other homes for them is the best long-term solution, then I'll look into that. But I'm not taking them any place they can be put down, and I don't want them walking away with just whoever. I have a nice landscaped backyard with a big covered deck and patio, where he'll have a dog bed in addition to the doghouse I bought. And the cats will have little cat cozies too. It's not like I'm tossing them into the jungle. We live in a temperate climate, and of course I'll bring them inside when the weather's inclement. Where I live, which is in a countrified area, most people have a great deal of lot acreage and live down private dirt roads. It's not unusual at all to keep outdoor pets. Many people love and care for their pets, but it's very common for them to not have animals in the house. I didn't want to be like that, but I don't know what else to do. My pets, including the cats, have been indoor and outdoor all their life. The cats were not exclusively raised indoors. Now those are my excuses, and I won't give any more. I completely understand that many people feel like animals should never live outside. I'm listening to everyone here who is saying just give them away, giving them away is better, and even to people saying return them to animal control or the pound, where there's a responsibility. If they aren't adopted, they will be euthanized. Even though I do not see it like this, that's definitely a majority opinion here. So I appreciate all these responses, and I will give more thought to this, but that's all I have to say for now. And honestly, I've gotten some very horrible inbox messages, calling me all kinds of names, as well as really mean stuff people shouldn't be saying to me. Not the jerk for being frustrated or implementing a no pets or plants rule. You are the jerk for putting the animals outside though. They'll likely just be even more neglected than they are now. Outdoor cats are a public nuisance. Take them to a shelter or rescue or find them a new home. You're the jerk. Rehome the animals instead of throwing them outside. Go to your local rescue and get help to rehome them. Those animals will not understand why they're being punished, and putting cats outside after being indoor animals is quite dangerous for them. Next time your family wants an animal, put your foot down rather than allowing that situation to happen. Shaking my head. Letting animals suffer just so you can make a point really upsets me. You're the jerk. You are their parent. You raised them. If they're lazy, it's you and your husband's fault. And putting these animals outside puts them and the wildlife in danger. Just rehome them instead of neglecting them. Well, what do you think? Is OP the jerk for how they're handling this or not? Please let us know. Nothing's worse than when your kids tell you they want pets, then you get them pets and they don't want to take care of them. Am I the jerk for giving my son's dog to his ex-wife? To begin with, I love my son with all my heart, but he blew up his marriage by cheating and has moved back home. I, female 55, have 3 kids. My oldest is my daughter, who's 30, then my twins, who are 25, male and female. My oldest just got married to a wonderful woman. My younger daughter is going to grad school overseas, and that leaves my son. Let's call him Carlos. He's always been a handful. He got married when he was 20. His ex-wife had a 3-year-old daughter whom I love, and no matter what, I am her grandmother. They later had a baby together, my other grandchild, who is 2. Lockdown caused a lot of stress in his life, and he works in a fly-in, fly-out camp job. He's gone for 2 weeks at a time, then home for 2 weeks. He makes very good money and enjoys spending it, maybe a little bit too much. Carlos cheated on his wife with a coworker. I'm not judging him. I'm not perfect, but he chose to leave his wife and kids and move back home. It doesn't really make sense for him to rent an apartment or something for the 12 days a month he's home, so I allowed it. But he decided to be a jerk, in my opinion, and bring his dog with him. My grandbabies love the dog, but he's trying to punish his ex for telling him to leave. It is a beautiful border collie, and it's the perfect dog for their home. Huge yard, lots of walking trails nearby, even an off-leash park only a 10-minute drive away. I live in an apartment downtown. I am allowed a dog, but if I were to have one, it would be something sedate and non-shedding like a Maltese. I swear, I tried watching this dog, but my son is irresponsible. He doesn't walk him much. He doesn't brush the dog. He's just holding on to the dog to lever his way into his ex's life. The last straw was this last time off work. He was away for 2 weeks and then came home for 1 day before flying off to the United States for a vacation with his new girlfriend. So I called my daughter-in-law, checked that she wanted the pup back. She almost cried with joy, packed up everything that belonged to the dog and took him over there. My grandkids were ecstatic. My son just came home for 3 days before he has to leave for work and asked where his dog is. I told him the truth. He's calling me a jerk for giving away his pet. Also because I said that if he tried to go get the dog back and bring it back, he was not welcome in my home. Am I the jerk? Not the jerk, in my opinion. He's only thinking of himself, not you, not the dog, and not his kids. Also, calling you a jerk? You're nice to let him back into your home at all after all of that. OP, he's always been hot-headed. I love him, but he is a pain in my backside. I wish his father had been around longer to help raise him. I tried, but it was hard. He's always been a hothead because he, likely, hasn't suffered real consequences. Tell him that if he's old enough to get himself into this mess, he's old enough to figure it out. Stop letting him live with you. Time for him to handle himself and his own life. People are so quick to blame the mother, but sometimes people just have kind of a bad temperament, or they have mental health problems that make their behavior challenging socially. It's not 100% nurture. If her other kids are great people, I would be inclined to believe that he may just be a mean person. I'm not generally supportive of unilaterally giving away someone's pet, but I think it was entirely justified in this case. He brought it into your home without asking you, and he's literally never home to take care of it. He was intentionally making you, the dog, and his own kids upset just to get back at his wife for not putting up with his cheating. Good job, Grandma. Not the jerk. Well, what do you think? Is OP the jerk for giving away her dog's son or not? Please let us know. Sounds like a very happy ending to me. Am I the jerk for losing it on my husband for lying about an emergency to get me to leave my brother's wedding early? My husband has been sick for a few days. He got sick around the time of my brother's wedding. I took care of him 24 hours for days. He's on meds and can move and go to the bathroom and eat on his own. I told him I was going to my brother's wedding and he threw a fit, saying I couldn't leave him alone while he's sick. I told him he was not that sick. It's just some stomach issue that he's getting treatment for, and suggested he call his sister to come stay with him. He said no and told me to miss it. I got upset and bluntly said no, and that he could survive for a few hours while I attend the wedding. He sulked, and as I was leaving, he said he hoped I won't ever come back. It hurt my feelings, but I knew that he was just mad and he didn't mean it. At the wedding, I got a text from him saying he lost balance and fell off the stairs and hurt his back. He said he was in a lot of pain and he threw up and he couldn't move, and insisted that I get home ASAP. I freaked out and started calling his phone, but he didn't answer. I thought he must have passed out, and I freaked out even more. I got in my car and drove back to our house immediately. When I got home, I rushed towards the stairs while calling out his name, but he wasn't there. I really started to get freaked out. I rushed into the bedroom and found him in bed, drinking juice. And as soon as he saw me, he put the phone down. I instantly knew he lied, so I lost it on him, and I started yelling, saying that he freaked me out and caused me to miss my brother's wedding for nothing, absolutely nothing. He said that he had already told me I couldn't leave him alone in the house, and that this very scenario could have actually happened if I stayed there any longer. I yelled at him, calling him horrible, which made him cry. He started crying and throwing his juice all over the place. Throwing his juice? I had to step out and call his sister, thinking she'd come help, but she came and started going off on me, saying that I had a lot of nerve, expecting her to back me up after I so carelessly left her brother alone at the house in that state just to attend a party. We got into an argument, and I went to stay with my family. My brother understood when I explained the situation to him. My husband and I haven't seen each other since then, but his sister kept saying I had no right to scream at her brother and cause him a panic attack, and said he at least was clear with me from the start, but I chose to be dismissive. Was what I did dismissive? Edit. I'm 26 years old. He's 23 years old. Not the jerk. He lied, he's manipulative, and he mistreats you. The only reason to go back to that house should be to collect your belongings. Sis, get out of this relationship. This is only the tip of the iceberg of what he's going to put you through when you don't do what he says. He's a controlling person, highly likely manipulative, and is actively seeking to destroy your relationship with your family. Let's be clear, this was about control. In a functional family, a sibling's wedding is sacred. You move heaven and earth to be there to support your sibling and to celebrate the start of their new life with their spouse. Your husband hurt your brother, pulling you away from what should have been about him and his wife. He created a scene because I can guarantee that the conversation became about your husband's injury and the emergency. He robbed you of special time with your family. This would destroy any trust I had in my spouse permanently. If a person is so highly manipulative that they could pull this crap, I'd be gone. Please seriously consider where your future with him is going. A person like your husband will do this again. It could be calling your boss at work to get you fired because you can't go on a work trip with him. It could be destroying friendships with close friends because he doesn't like them. It will be isolating you from your family because he doesn't want to inconvenience himself. Well, who do you think is the jerk? OP or her husband? Please let us know. I'm still wondering what flavor juice that was. Juice. Boss says I can't come in early to set up my card, so I come in right at clock in. Coworker who leaves early gets mad at me. So this happened back in 2015 through 2016. I, now 28, female, was working as a phlebotomist in a local hospital, and I worked first shift, which was about 3 a.m. to 3 p.m. I loved to come in about 10 to 15 minutes early and just set up my card. Nothing fancy, just metal wired shelving types, and we had our own personal phlebotomist trays that we put in the top section of the cart. I didn't always restock my tray before leaving my shift, so I typically come in early to organize it and get my metal cart ready. It usually took me maybe 5 minutes to put my tray on a cart and put the handful of tubes I needed back in place. Then I'd spend the rest of my time waking up in the break room with coffee. Well, one woman, I can't remember her age, who came into work a few months after I started and I had issues. I found her lazy and rude. Examples: she would come in and snap at people when they tried to help her. She would take a book with her during the morning rush, which was 3 a.m. to 6 or 7 a.m., and sit on the floor to read and not come back to the lab to help after collecting her labs. She would hang out during the nurses' celebrations and not come back for hours at a time. She wouldn't clock in until the last second, and then she'd clock out the earliest minute she could. When it was time to start the morning rush, she'd get mad if someone took the stack of labs she wanted, and she'd go demanding them. She and I worked the same overnight shift, but I got tired of her attitude and switched shifts. Well, like I said, I like to come early and set up my cart before I clocked in, and she figured this out quickly, so she would try and hand me the stroke or trauma pager, something that needed to be handed to the next phlebotomist who was scheduled to take it that shift. But she'd try to give me hers even if I wasn't scheduled for that one. But I refused, saying, "I'm not clocked in yet." So she just left it on my cart a few times without telling me, which led to it going off for a call to the ER, and I had to clock in early. And when I saw her in the lab again, I told her to never do that again. The conversation got heated, which led to a meeting with me, the coworker, and our supervisor. Our supervisor took her side and said, "Just take it, and if it goes off, you clock in, and then I will adjust the clock in on your computer," saying that she had shortened my time on the clock. So I said fine. I set my alarm for later in the morning, and I started coming in the last minute I could to clock in at 2:59 a.m. Yes, it made me start my rush a little later, but the look on my coworker's face when she saw me later, right before she was to clock out, as she was trying to hand me a pager I wasn't scheduled to have, and I already had the one I was supposed to, was priceless. She complained to the supervisor, who tried to talk to me, but I said, "Well, I'm not supposed to be here until 3, so that's when I get here and clock in now. I don't want my hours messed up." She didn't even try to argue. The coworker was very upset. She even screamed through the lab, demanding someone take her pager so she could go home. It was still 20 minutes until her shift was done.
Support our channel by joining as a member today, and we'll give you a shout out in our next video.
Or come watch this video next. You won't believe what Karen does in that one.